serious. We're starting the video now. Just come on. Dave Scott, Lawyer for Purposely Unplugged. I'm just annoying the heck out of Lori this morning. Wow, we did that piece on fawning last month and kind of blew up. Lots of folks asking questions. And I want to do a quick recap because, all the questions I asked you, I probably, as a male with poor communication skills, I probably only know half the answers. Well, we'll talk about that later today. But let's talk a little bit about fawning right off the bat, okay?
Okay, so you're right. We've had lots of people, and I've had lots of people talk to me about it as well. So fight, flight, freeze. We know that our body automatically responds. It's in that kind of danger situation. But there is this other piece, fawning, where some folks have learned a body response and their body responds automatically. That in a stressful or crisis or a situation where there might be conflict, this person tends to pull back, hold back, and soothe someone else to avoid that conflict. So it's something, Dave, that I talk about all the time. I'm glad we can talk about it here. Every time I get a chance to talk publicly, this is what I'm going to speak about. And definitely it's something that people are talking about more. Now, the book that goes along with this, that kind of talks about this as well, Deb Dana Anchored. So I'll send that to you so we can put that at the bottom.
Sure.
She talks about different body states, and that really helps us understand sympathetic because it is one of the body states.
Okay. Well, and like when we talked about last month, and yes, please send me that and we'll put it below. Folks can check it out and get that information, and they can give you a call as well if this, if they're dealing with this in their life, all these different stages of what's going on. Maybe this is something that they didn't realize they need to address.
Mm-hmm.
So what else? I forgot. What do you want to talk about today?
You're in a cheeky mood today, Dave.
I am cheeky today.
So what the listeners don't know is I was late for the appointment. All these things went wrong. And we've spent probably 20 minutes just kind of being cheeky with each other. Communication. And that's why you're opening it this way. We had planned to talk about communication today.
All right. And you and I were running through scenarios and it's so big and so vast. And I'm going to let you give me the starting point because then, it'll just trip me and I'll start asking really crazy questions. So go ahead, bait me.
We've been on a series about family of origin. So the way that I see this come up with clients I'm working with is in my family, we could never talk about this. Or in my family, we never sat down and talked at the dinner table. We didn't have that kind of time. So we've always been starting our series is about what did you observe in your family home? What did you observe as a young person? And then how did that develop for you? Some people say, because I experienced that, I'm doing the opposite. Or because I experienced that, I'm fearful to even talk about this. So it's something I talk about all the time. I mean, obviously, in the work that I do. And it's nice that we can begin to talk about it here.
Can you give me an example?
Well, a topic you've been trying to avoid too, Dave. We've been talking about intimacy too, and you've been really holding back on that one.
I know.
We've been trying to. So, there again, in
Oh,
this
very
situation,
cheeky.
in this situation when a client comes in and I automatically talk about intimacy levels within any relationship with adults, sometimes they pull right back. And I
Yeah.
can immediately identify, wait a minute, that's not even a topic that's common. Where for me, it's a topic that I talk about every week, probably every day. So for me, it's very, very common. So someone will say, look, we never talked about that in our family. Like it's going to take me a bit to even begin to say some of that language or some of that terminology. It's going to take me a while to get that into words. That's how I know that from a communication standpoint, that family, it wasn't safe to talk about.
And really, it probably, like you said, it can go back generations too, right? Like it's sort of built in, like you just said, around that was not a subject that was open for discussion at the dinner table or during family time, but probably one of those situations where never talking about it, never understood it, right?
Right.
So again,
Right.
you compact that and you put it away because that's not something, like you said, that they're gonna talk about.
Mhm.
In that general sense, then, when you're dealing with somebody that's maybe having that conversation with you and doesn't really want to break that barrier, what are the starting, like, how do you start that conversation? Like, how do you open that communication?
Well, and it's not even that. It can be finances. There's so many pieces in our lives that we observed as
Yeah.
kids that there's so many topics. So whatever this topic might be of no, we never talked about that. No, that was never a topic. Whatever it is, then we just gently explore it. I tend to always bring it to the table safely, give it some space, leave it at the table, and then a client lets me know when they're ready to work on it, because these things are deeply wired for us, Dave, and it
Yeah.
takes us some time to get our own thoughts together before we can actually start talking about these things.
It is, and when you're starting that conversation, here's my take on this. So, you've asked me about you've asked me about doing this show on that, and we will. But is it me breaking that down in my mind to say it's okay to talk about? Is that what you're seeing with the client?
It can be, but I mean, I build safety around all conversations just in the
Yeah,
therapeutic environment.
right.
So it can be that. But it can also just be this person being ready to talk about it. I mean,
Right.
honestly, it's just whenever the time is right for this person. And that's for any topic that's going on in their life. That's really this therapeutic basis of how we maneuver through any topic. But when we're thinking of this communication piece too, it brings me back to sender and receiver. We are sending a message. There is a receiver of the message. And I think that's really integral too, because we bring all kinds of perceptions and our own perceptions in communication in our lives in this sender receiver kind of communication path.
I'm stuck back because I think what you're doing when you start that conversation is you're planting the seed.
Mhm.
So I think and you answer this because I'm not trying to answer this for you, but I'm trying to make it so that I understand it. Is you're planting the seed in order for me to have that chance on my own to start thinking about this scenario so that I can present it in a better context to you.
And be emotionally ready to talk about it.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that part.
Yeah, there's a whole emotional component here, right? I mean, a client needs to be in a position where they can talk about something safely. And sure, planting a seed is a good way to look at it. And we can plant seeds around lots of things. And
Yeah.
even in our relationships with our kids, our partners, our colleagues, even people you're talking about, friends earlier on before we got on air, in all of our life, yes, we can plant these seeds to then cultivate conversations in the future.
As an individual, when I try and do that, you and I were talking about this too. Um, it can depend a lot on the scenario and the situation you're in, because I'll find if you're not ready to have that conversation today, I'm probably not going to approach you about it. I might put that off, or I might make a simple suggestion to say, well, let's talk about this sometime. But in an everyday situation, in a family home, it's busy, it's hectic. You have to take time to sort of bridge that a little bit, don't you?
Mhm. And some families don't even have that time, Dave. That's what I'm observing. We are living intricately busy lives, and we all have cell phones now, which are drawing us away from communication. So then we're communicating in a different way via text. So even in families, I've heard scenarios where a parent will text their child inside the house to come and do something or talk about something. So our lives have drastically changed. And we talked about this intergenerational piece too, right? How we were raised, what we saw in the generation prior to us and the generation prior to them, and then how we are now interacting in this world that is so different in that we don't have time and we all have cell phones now that we are carrying around with us.
Another part about that communication that I see a lot is you'll just see people when you go to communicate with them, this great big sigh,
Mhm.
like it's work, right? You
Mhm.
know what I mean? And you're like, you can take that either way. I mean, sometimes I will think, oh, they're having a hard day, right? But it's just maybe preparing themselves because we're kind of forgetting that skill in a one-on-one situation, how to communicate properly or how to just, okay, absorb the moment, the question, and then respond, where you see this almost frustration build before they can even respond. Is that I think that's becoming more of a normal occurrence, which in my opinion, which I don't agree with at all,
Mhm.
because communication, any kind of communication conversation should, in my opinion, be fun and educational.
Mhm. fun and educational for you, but for other people, it might be defensive, and there might be
Yeah.
attack that happens in that. And they know that the patterning is attack and defensiveness. And that sigh is actually probably a good thing. There is a mindfulness journal from about a year ago that highlighted sighing and how good that is for your body. So before we talk next, I'll find that and reference it and bring it to our conversation. So a sigh is actually a good thing. So see that as a good thing in the person with you because they're taking that break.
It's a release.
And then you're right, in that conversation, it is work. I mean, communication is work. We don't do this very much anymore. Even in the world of work, for me, I mean, one of the things I dislike the most are meetings. I mean, where we have to sit and listen and process and exactly. So there's this piece where we've just changed. If we could get back to communicating, and if we can communicate with the next generation to kind of mentor and model that for them, that would be a good thing. But cell phones, Dave, I know we've talked about this over the last year. It's something within the family that you might want to take a look at. Just putting those cell phones down for 5 or 10 minutes where everybody can kind of communicate outside of text and without distraction.
I'm gonna. I know you're the therapist, but I'm gonna offer you some advice today. Are you ready?
Okay.
And you can disagree with this statement if you feel. Okay.
Okay.
The secret to communication is good listening.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't put that down or refute that. And I'll add to it that if we listen with the intent to understand versus listening with the intent to fix, that will help us as well.
One more thing on communication. Well, I got lots, but you probably got clients today. And when you're trying to communicate something to a person and it's just not sinking in, or they're just not in the mood, can you bring that back up, and how would you do it? Like you're going to have to walk away from that moment, but it's something important that you need to talk about. So do you let that person have their moment, maybe calm down, or maybe they're just not in the mood, but can you bring it back up, and how would you go about that?
Mm-hmm. You should bring it back up, absolutely, because that's part of fawning. When we don't bring it back up, when we let things go, that's part of fawning, actually. So, yes, you should bring it back up, but think about the other person's timing, where their awareness is. Have they had enough sleep? Have they eaten? Are the circumstances right for that person to be in a space where they can focus? But, Dave, there are some situations where some people just cannot get to those topics, will not get to those topics, aren't able to get to those topics. And then we need to decide, okay, what space does that hold in our life? And then what do we need to decide because of that? So that's really a complicated question.
Yeah. Plus, I'm thinking that if you're unable to communicate or talk about those problems or those situations, it's going to lead to more mental health issues down the road. Like not necessarily all the time, but I'm sure there's an overview here where you could see how not coping with something that happened as a child all through your life causes other stresses that may affect your mental health.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And as you were asking that question, I was thinking more in immediate relationships, right? Even situations where we brought things up and brought things up and brought things up, and it gets shut down and shut down and shut down. So even in that, even as we communicated about that, we were thinking about two different things. And so I'm glad that happened live on air, because this is exactly that kind of checking in and just making sure and taking the time and slowing it down.
It's, I think we could do like 10 parts on communication, because there's so many different components. When we were talking about the generational piece, understanding perception of reality, we've talked about that in the past, but I think there's more to this that we need to dive into down the road. Yeah. Why are we finding, like, I know the cell phones, I know the computers, I know the technology, but are people just less social now because of all that? Like, to have that communication, right? You used to walk out your door and say good morning to your neighbor. I don't know if people do that anymore. It was a form of communication, but it was a positive outlook on the day. Are we doing that through texting? Hey, have a good day, right? It's a different meaning then. And it's maybe, like you just said, it can be taken so many different ways. Were they being sarcastic? Were they being truthful?
Yeah. Short, small communication is really tough because there is miscommunication there. It's not just texting, though. I mean, we do this in Facebook and Instagram,
Yeah.
all these different LinkedIn, all these different social media parts and pieces that are coming into play. Do we talk to our neighbors right now? No, but that's a whole nother episode, really, if we look at why we don't and what's happening there. When we come back to communication, though, it's each of us taking an active role to just making sure that those in our lives that are important and vital, that we are mentoring and modeling good communication, spending the time, slowing it down. And then if someone's having an issue, find a therapist, start talking about it so that you can get some assistance in how and what and how to scope these conversations.
And people too, um, you'll, I'll find myself if I'm trying to explain something to somebody, I'll get to the point where I'm very blunt.
Mhm.
It's like, no, this is what I'm saying. And I'm not trying to be rude or mean, but I want to drive the point home because it can't be missed. You know what I mean? Like it has to be right in that scenario. I mean, I'm giving you a very weak example, but I've seen that. And I've seen other ones where I will find that I might get frustrated when somebody says, well, I don't really understand what you're talking about. Can you explain that to me? And then you're going through all these scenarios, trying to figure out a way to compromise your opinion to say what you need to say to this person. So on even the sender receiver piece, again, right, it can be very frustrating because maybe you're dealing with somebody that's, I'm not going to give away my age here, 40 or 50 years younger than you. but you know what I mean? Like it's just, you've got to really, boy, you really got to be open-minded today to have a conversation about communication.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And that's where those that we're close to, as long as we can have good communication. And even when it breaks down, being able to take the time and come back and revisit it and resolve or repair whatever went wrong in the communication pattern.
I thanks for updating on fawning.
Mhm.
Communication, I know you've got lots more we want to talk about, but I do have to let you go. Um, Anything you want to add? Because I think, like you said, we're going to get that information out about the lady that you're talking about on fawning. So I want to get that out for folks. But anything else that you've got to share?
I just appreciate that we can always have this time and just appreciate, as listeners share feedback so we know where to keep going with topics. Yes, communication's a big one. We talked about it last year. We'll come
Mm-hmm.
back to it again. We definitely will. And Family of Origin has kind of been the series we've been on. So
Yeah, it
we
all
will
started there.
continue.
It all started there, right? And now you can see, if you watch the videos, you can see that timeline, and you can see how we're at communication again because it all leads to that, which is incredible. Thanks for doing this.
Have a great day.
You too.